Salam, peace be upon you. My name is Muhammad Laik Siddiqui, the father of Holophase. Let me begin with a scene you can see so clearly, it almost feels like you're standing inside it. Two people are on the same mountain at dawn, looking at the same valley. One points and says, "The river is turning silver." The other says, "No, it's turning black." They argue, not because one is lying, but because one is standing where the sun hits the water, and the other is standing in the shadow of a cliff. Same river, same morning, different viewpoint, different patch of the world, different domain, even if they don't use that word. Now imagine a third person walks up and doesn't take sides. Instead, they ask one question: where exactly are you standing, and what exactly are you calling the river? That question is the birth of public language, because without it, disagreement becomes endless. With it, disagreement becomes precise. It becomes something you can resolve, either by realizing you're talking about different regions or by realizing you're using different ways of reading the same structure. This is why Part 10 exists. Up to now, we have built the alphabet of the pure Phi language. We began with Phi, pronounced Phi, the circle mark, a phase value assigned to each event in the minimal support X. We refused absolute phase. We installed the rule that shifting phi by a constant does not change the world, because the world does not owe us a privileged zero on the circle. We learned to lift, creating a local unwrapped version, phi tilde, pronounced phi tilde, on patches where unwrapping is allowed. We learned to declare branch cuts when topology forces our hand, and we learned the ethical law of cut movability. If your conclusion depends on where you drew the cut, you are measuring your pencil, not the universe. Then we took the first derivative word, A, defined as A equals D phi tilde, and we saw why it matters. A survives the relabeling freedoms. It doesn't care about shifting the phase by a constant, and it doesn't care about adding whole terms of 2 pi times an integer to the lift. So A is the first public change object. And then we climbed into finite jets, packages of how it changes, up to a declared depth n, the local alphabet at a point. Now comes the next step. An alphabet is not yet language. An alphabet becomes language only when we freeze what counts as a sentence. And that is exactly what we do here. We freeze what counts as a local statement in a way that cannot hide assumptions, cannot smuggle in metaphysics, cannot pretend that a claim is universal when it is actually local, and cannot pretend to speak about change without stating the depth at which that change is defined. We are going to build one form, one clean sentence shape, that every honest local claim must fit inside. Not because we love bureaucracy, but because reality is subtle, and human speech is slippery. This is the public local sentence form. And once you see it, you start noticing something. Almost every fight in science, almost every philosophical war about what reality is, almost every disagreement that goes in circles, most of them collapse into three boring causes. 1. People are talking about different domains. 2. People are using different depths, different ends, different derivative access. 3. People are accidentally using something that changes when you relabel, something gauge dependent, then mistaking that for structure. Part 10 is the discipline that makes those three causes impossible to hide. So let's build it from the ground up, slowly, with images you can carry. Picture an old city map printed on paper. On the map, you see streets, intersections, rivers, and parks. Two tourists argue. This road is straight. No, it's curved. They argue because one is looking at the road in the old paper map, which distorts distances, and the other is walking the road in the real city, where it bends around the hill. Again, same object, different representation. The conflict is not about the road, it's about the language. Holophase does not allow that kind of confusion to survive. Holophase says, if you claim something, you must say what you mean, how it is computed from the basic alphabet, and where it applies. If you cannot do that, you have not made a public claim. You may have made poetry. You may have made a feeling. You may have made a private story, but not public structure. Here is the sentence form, spoken in words. A local statement has the shape O of x equals f of j n phi of x on a declared domain D. Let me unpack every symbol as if we were putting labels on objects in a room. First, x. X is not necessarily a point in space. We have not assumed space as a primitive container. X is simply a location in the support X, meaning one event position in the minimal support where our language is defined. It is the place where we are speaking. Second, O of X. O stands for observable, but not in the sense of a laboratory instrument. Those protocols come later. Here it means the value of the statement, the output, the thing you are claiming about the world at the location X. Think of O as the result you are presenting: a number, a vector-like report, a yes-no condition, a pattern label, whatever the sentence outputs. Third, Jn phi of x. This is the n-jet of phi at x. Say it slowly. Jn phi at x. It means the finite stack of derivatives of the lift up to order n evaluated at x on a domain where that depth is allowed. If n is 0, the jet contains only the phase value information, in the sense of local lift value, though its absolute value will not be physical. If n is 1, it includes the first derivative word a. If n is 2, it includes how a changes, and so on. A jet is like a local fingerprint of the field up to a declared depth. It's the alphabet bundle you allow yourself to use. Fourth, f. F is a rule, a function, a recipe. It is the way you turn the alphabet letters into the output O. It says, take the jet bundle, combine its components in this particular way, and you get a statement value. In everyday terms, f is the interpretation map from the raw local derivative data into the particular thing you're trying to talk about. And finally, on a declared domain D. This is the part that most scientific language hides behind casual words like here, in general, usually, for most cases, in the system, in the region, assuming, and then never properly defines. Holophase makes domain part of the sentence. D is the region of X where the claim is supposed to be valid. It includes all excisions, cut loci exclusions, regularity requirements, and any conditions required for the rule F to even make sense. This is not an afterthought. It is not fine print. It is meaning. Because a sentence without a domain is like a promise without conditions, or a recipe without quantities, or a map without a scale. Now, if that form feels dry, let's return to life. Imagine you are baking bread. Someone says, bake it until it's done. That sounds helpful until you try to do it. What does done mean? In what oven? At what temperature? With what dough hydration? For what loaf size? On what altitude? With what flour? Bread is not less real because the instructions were vague. The instructions were the problem. Now imagine a real instruction. Bake at 230 degrees Celsius for 25 minutes on the middle rack until the internal temperature reaches 95 degrees. That instruction is public. It can be checked. It can be repeated. It can be criticized. It can be improved. The public local sentence form is the bread recipe of reality. O of x equals f of j n phi of x on d is the sentence that comes with temperature, time, rack position, and internal check. It is what I claim, how I compute it, what depth I used, and where it applies. Now we seal this form with the 4 gates, because without gates, language becomes a loophole machine. First gate, well-formedness. In holophase, well-formed does not mean sounds plausible. It means is a legal sentence in the grammar. The well-formedness gate here says, domain and depth are part of the sentence type. That means you do not get to write O of x equals f of j n phi of x and leave n or d implicit. The pair dn is not optional. It is part of what the sentence is. If you omit them, you have not said something wrong. You have failed to say something. This gate is the difference between I feel like the tide is rising and at this inlet between these two rocks over this time window and at this measurement depth, the water level increased by this amount. One is impression, one is public. In holophase, public speech begins when you can point to your depth and your domain. It also means something even more subtle. Different sentences can talk about the same thing, but not be the same sentence if they use different N or different D. There are different claims because there are claims at different resolution or different region. This alone dissolves countless false contradictions in physics. Second gate, invariance. This gate asks a ruthless question. If I change my description but not the structure, do I get the same claim? We already know the allowed redescriptions in PS0 language. We can shift the phase by a constant. We can shift the lift by whole terms of 2 pi times an integer. We can change charts, change local coordinates on the patch without changing the underlying field. We can move branch cuts without dragging them across defects. We can refine our cover into smaller patches. These are all changes in description, not changes in reality. The invariance gate for sentence form says, if two descriptions are equivalent, they must yield equivalent O. In other words, your claim must not depend on the label paint on the ring, or the sheet number of the staircase, or the atlas grid you used, or the arbitrary location of your scissors cut. If it does, then it is not structure. It is gauge artifact. It is a private coordinate habit. This is why the sentence form forces F to be built from invariant combinations of jet data. It's like measuring a mountain's height. If your measurement depends on where you decide that sea level is, your number is not absolute truth. But differences in height between 2 points can be public if they survive changing your reference. In holophase, A was the first object that survived these relabelings. Jets are built from A and higher derivatives, and they transform under chart changes in lawful ways. Your function f must respect those lawful transformations, so the resulting O is meaningfully the same. This is where holophase does something very beautiful. It separates reality from accent. Two people can speak different accents, different coordinates, different lifts, and still say the same sentence, as long as the invariants match. Third gate, domain. This gate is the guardian of honesty, because many equations in physics appear to break only because someone forgot to say where they are valid. In this part, the domain gate says, if the rule f uses operations that are not always defined, the guards must be stated. Let's make that concrete without drowning in math. Think of dividing by something. If you have a formula that includes 1 divided by something, then that formula is not valid where something is 0. That is not a philosophical issue. It is grammar. Or think of taking a square root. If you take the square root of something and you want a real number, you must ensure the inside is not negative. Again, grammar. In holophase, we do not allow silent singularities. We do not allow a function f to quietly assume conditions it never declared. We do not allow sentences that secretly step outside their domain and then pretend the blowup is a mystery of the universe. If f needs a guard, then d must include the guard. If you say this quantity is defined by normalizing a vector, then you must say where that vector is not zero. If you say this statement uses a lift, then you must exclude the cut locus if the lift jumps there. If you say this statement uses an nth derivative, then D must be in a region typed Cn, meaning the lift is differentiable to order n there. This is one of the quiet revolutions of holophase. It turns many mysteries into honest boundary declarations. Fourth gate, non-encodability. This is the gate that keeps the language small and powerful. The sentence form says, local structure is expressed as a function of finite jets. If someone claims they need a new primitive, some new kind of local statement not expressible in the form O of x equals f of j and phi of x, they must pass the non-encodability challenge. They must prove that their claim cannot be rewritten using the existing alphabet. This is the language's immune system against unnecessary entities. It does not say never add anything. It says earn every new primitive. Because once you allow primitives without proof, you can invent endless foundations and call them physics. Now, with these 4 gates installed, the public local sentence form becomes the clean doorway through which every local claim must pass. But we still need to feel what it accomplishes. So let's return to the ocean. Imagine a person stands on a cliff and says, "The ocean is calm." Another person stands on a boat and says, "The ocean is violent." Who is right? Without the sentence form, it becomes a metaphysical argument about what calm means. With the sentence form, you can translate observable O at x equals a function f of the n-jet at x on domain D. The cliff observer is effectively using one domain, averaging over a wide region, and one depth n, maybe only low-order variations visible from afar. Their f compresses the jet data into something like average roughness at low resolution. The boat observer is using a different domain, right where waves break, and a different depth. Higher derivatives matter for slamming forces and choppy patterns. Their f is sensitive to sharper local change. They're not contradicting each other. They're making 2 different public statements about 2 different domains at 2 different depths. That's what makes holophase powerful. It doesn't silence disagreement, it classifies it. And classification is the beginning of resolution. Now let's talk about triunity inside sentences, because this is a subtle trap. Triunity says that time, space, and motion are not independent primitives. There are 3 readouts of the same derivative stem. In the PS0 language, the neutral object is A, the derivative of the lift, and higher derivatives, jets, are built from that. So when someone writes a sentence that sounds purely temporal or purely spatial, holophase treats that as a projection, not a primitive. Even if O highlights one aspect, it is still a function of jets that contain the triecho. That means the sentence must be rewritable back into neutral jet form, without assuming the separation as a fundamental fact. This is like a spotlight in a theater. A spotlight can illuminate only the actor's face. That doesn't mean the actor is only a face. The actor has a whole body, and the body exists whether the spotlight shines on it or not. Similarly, frequency might look temporal, wavelength might look spatial, transport might look kinematic. But in holophase, these are spotlights on one object, A and its jet tower. The full object carries the triunity. The sentence is required to be a function of that full object. This keeps us from the ancient error, treating projections as fundamental substances. Now let's make the sentence form feel like a machine you can actually use, without dragging in measurement protocols or dynamics. Suppose we stand at some x in our support x, and we are allowed to speak up to some depth n on a domain D. We take the jet j n phi at x, our alphabet bundle. Then we choose a function f that outputs some O. What kinds of O can exist in this language? Anything that can be built from the finite jet data and remains invariant under allowed redescriptions. This is important. Holophase is not saying your observable must be simple. It is saying it must be definable from the alphabet. F can be extremely complex, but it must be explicit in principle. This is why the sentence form is so effective. It turns vague claims into explicit definitions, and it turns debates into questions about which part differs: the domain, the depth, the function, or the invariances. Now let's state the formal prediction of this part, but we will speak it like a living truth, not a slogan. Prediction. Most disagreements in physics reduce to mismatched domains, mismatched depth n, or hidden gauge dependence. Think about this across the history of science. When people argued about whether light is a wave or a particle, they were often applying the wrong domain to the wrong concept. Some experiments reveal wave-like interference patterns, a sentence built from smooth jet structures. Others reveal discrete detection events, sentences involving defects, topology, or boundary conditions. The fight was partly a fight between different sentence types that were never declared as different. When people argue about whether the universe is deterministic or probabilistic, often they mix a sentence about underlying structure with a sentence about limited access. Finite access can produce statistical descriptions even if the underlying language is deterministic. If you don't declare your depth and domain, you can mistake epistemic limitation for ontic randomness. The sentence form forces those declarations. When people argue about different formulations of the same theory, often they are using different gauges, different coordinate choices, and treating gauge-dependent intermediates as if they were physical. The invariance gate exposes that immediately. So the prediction is not a boast, it is a diagnosis. Most confusion is grammatical. Now the falsifier. Falsifier. Find a meaningful local statement that cannot be cast into the form O of x equals f of j and phi of x on any patch. In other words, show a local claim about reality, publicly meaningful, that cannot be expressed as a function of the finite jet alphabet and the topological tokens on any valid domain. That would mean the PS0 language is incomplete. That is an honest possibility. A language must always risk falsification to be scientific. But the bar is clear. And that clarity is part of what makes this language real rather than decorative. Now, before we close, I want to give you a visual image of how the sentence form sits inside the whole holophase tree you've been building. Picture the holophase tree as a living organism. At the root is undifferentiated phi, the circle mark assignment. From that root grows the lift discipline, local unwrapping on patches with the freedom of shifting the lift by whole turns. From lift grows A, the first derivative word, the first verb. From A grows the finite jet tower, the stacked alphabet of higher change. Alongside this growth runs topology, winding numbers, holonomy, defect charges, integer facts that arise where lift fails globally. Now, the sentence form is not another branch. It is the grammar that tells you how to use any branch to write a claim. It is the rule that says, a claim is not a feeling. A claim is an output defined as a function of the jet alphabet on a declared domain respecting invariance. That is the sentence that prevents cheating. It prevents you from saying, "This is the nature of reality," while hiding the fact that your claim only holds in a certain region, at a certain smoothness, in a certain coordinate choice. And because it prevents cheating, it makes progress possible. Because once everyone must write claims in the same sentence form, science becomes like building a city with shared standards. Different architects can create different buildings, but the beams must meet the same load requirements, the blueprints must specify materials, and the safety codes are explicit. Disagreement becomes engineering, not myth. Now let me seal the essence of part 10 in one vivid carry-forward image. Imagine you and I are in a library that contains a single infinite book, reality. The pages are written in a script that is infinitely deep. You can zoom into any letter and find smaller letters inside it. Finite jets are how we choose a zoom level. We decide how deep we are reading. Public sentence form is how we write a citation. We write the page number, the line, the zoom level, and the rule we use to interpret it. Without that citation, we are just arguing about vibes. With it, we are building shared knowledge. And that is the entire point of this part. We have now frozen what counts as a local statement. A local claim must identify its output, specify the jet depth it uses, declare the domain where it is valid, and survive all allowed changes of description. From here, the next step is inevitable. Once we have the sentence form, we must understand equivalence. How two different looking sentences can be the same statement in different coordinates, different lifts, different charts, different accents of the same underlying meaning. That is where we go next. But we do not rush. We keep the discipline. We keep the honesty. We keep the vow that we made at the very beginning. We will not start with what we cannot justify. We will not add what we have not earned. We will not mistake our labels for reality. A circle mark. Unwrapped where allowed. Differentiated to license depth. Packaged into finite jets. And then spoken as public sentences with declared domain and invariance. That is how reality becomes readable without mythology. That is how the holophase language speaks. Always, peace be upon you.